Jasaranandana Braja Janaranjana Shamuna Tira Bonachari Shamuna Tira Bonachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Bonachari Jamuna Tira Bonachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Bonachari Jamuna Tira Bonachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrindam Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Sivasadi Gaur Bhakta-vrinda. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta-vrinda. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta-vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Om Vishnupada Paramahansa Parivrajakacharya Stotarakata Shri Srimad Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. ISKCON founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Shekahu Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhana Ki Jai. Shri Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Navadvip Dham Ki Jai. Shri Shri Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Shama Veda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Chaivam Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudidayat Nasta Prayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shlokir Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. Reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, the glories of devotional service. Third canto, 25th chapter, 14th text, is that correct? Tam Imam Te Pravakshami Yam Avocham Purangage Rishinam Shrotu Kamanam Yogam Sarvagya Naipunam Tamimam Te Pravakshami Yamavocham Purange Risham Shrotu Kamanam Yogam Sarvaganaipunam Tamimam Te Pravakshami Yamavocham Parange Pranange Nainam Shrotu Kamanam Yogam Shrivanganaipunam Tamimam Te Pravakshami Yamavocham Purange Rishinam Shrotu Kamanam Yogam Sarvagyatam Punam Sarvanganai Punam Yamivam Jagvirtani Yamavucham Parangahe Rishanam Shrotukamanam Yogam Sarvanganai Punam Tamimam Te Bhavakshami Yamavocham Puranage Rishinam Shrutukamanam Yogam Sarvanganaipunam. Ladies? Tamimam te bravakshyami Yamavocham Puranage Rishinam Shrutukamanam Yogam Sarvanganaipunam. Word for word. Tamimam, that very. Te, to you. Pravakshami, I shall explain. Yam, which. Avocham, I explained. Pura, formerly. Anage, O pious mother. Rishanam, to the sages. Shrotirkamanam, eager to hear. Yogam, yoga system. Sarva anga, in all respects. Naipunam, service side and practical. Naipunam, serviceable and practical. Translation. O most pious mother, I shall now explain unto you the ancient yoga system, which I explained formerly to the great sages. It is serviceable and practical in every way. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The Lord does not manufacture a new system of yoga. Sometimes it is claimed that someone has become an incarnation of God and is expounding a new theological aspect of the absolute truth. But here we find that although Kapila Muni is the Lord himself and is capable of manufacturing a new doctrine for his mother, he nevertheless says, open quote, I shall just explain the ancient system which I once explained to the great sages because they were also anxious to hear about it. Close quote. When we have a super excellent process already present in Vedic scriptures, there is no need to concoct a new system to mislead the innocent public. At present, it has become a fashion to reject the standard system and present something bogus in the name of a newly invented process of yoga. The verse again, O most pious mother, I shall now explain unto you the ancient yoga system, which I explained formerly to the great sages. It is serviceable and practical in every way. So at the end of the purport, Prabhupada writes that at present it has become a fashion to reject the standard system and present something bogus in the name of a newly invented process of yoga. I suppose there are many newly invented processes of yoga. This was written maybe 50 years ago or something like that. And some of the more bizarre types of yoga that are currently presented are aerial yoga, which is a kind of thing where they hang someone told me about these, like a hammock affair from the ceiling, and people practice yoga postures or asanas kind of in the air. That's why it's called aerial yoga. And there's something called sup yoga, which is a kind of thing where people stand on a platform that's floating on the water. And that's to increase their muscles in the legs so that they can maintain balance and proper enunciation. And there's another thing called face yoga, where people practice exercises in their face to gain, muscular control of their facial muscles. There's a process, I think, in South India called Kathakali dancing. And the Kathakali dancers performed at one of the Rath Yatra festivals. And it was a very, they paint their faces in multi-colors. And they have very subtle movements of the eyes and the cheekbones and the nose and the ears. And it's a little too far out, or too far beyond what most people could understand. But it's a form of yoga and dancing. So the reason that there's, I don't know if there's anybody here who is practicing yoga, because I know that they have a yoga course down at the Krishna Village. But yoga, the word yoga comes from Latin and Sanskrit. I think it means yoke, original in English, or union, and it's a kind of attachment to God. And that's why there's a temple where Bhakti Yoga is practiced, and the yoga is a linking process, like a yoke, to God. So this is there are different forms of yoga, but this is considered where it should lead to. You may have to practice Hatha Yoga or Hot Yoga or Bhaja Yoga, Raja Yoga, but they all lead to linking with the Supreme. And it's a very ancient process. And Prabhupada mentions here that sometimes it's fashionable to reject the standard system and present something bogus in the name of a newly invented process of yoga. These ones I mentioned are some of the more bizarre ones. But there's I think it's not necessarily new today, but there's a process called hot yoga, where people have to sit do yoga postures in a room that's very hot, something like 34 degrees Celsius, which is in the high 80s Fahrenheit. And because they perspire a lot, it's supposed to relieve the body of a lot of toxins. So this is another form, a very popular form of yoga. So there are many different types of yoga that are popular and practiced in this day and age. But the process that it's mentioned here, as Lord Kapila is explaining, is that he explained it. He is an incarnation of Krishna, and he explained it. He says formerly. So now there's another concept called plagiarism. I think it comes from a Latin word meaning to steal. And some of you may know this devotee. He's become somewhat popular, and he's kind of a motivational speaker. His name is Jay Shetty. And he was accused at one point, he's not accused now of this, but of plagiarism. Plagiarism is, I don't know where it started, but it's a kind of way that people profess a certain philosophy that was done before, and they don't name where it came from. That's a form of stealing, you might say. So in academic circles, this is considered to be very improper. And they've even gone so far, so I've heard, in some universities, as withdrawing people's degrees, master's degrees and PhD degrees and bachelor's degrees and so on, because they stole information without saying what the source was. Prabhupada was always very careful in his writings of saying where this information came from. If it was from a scripture, which scripture it was, which chapter it was, which verse it was, and who spoke this thing. So he was very conscious, because he was one of the things he was doing in his writing was appealing to the lettered classes of people who were very well educated and very sophisticated in terms of philosophy. Some of you may know that there's a group in Boston. That's where Harvard is located, in the suburb of Boston, and MIT is located, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And there was a group of people that were called the Boston Brahmins. I think they stole the word Brahmins from India. They didn't exactly steal it, but they were considered the elite intellectuals. In a way, it was kind of ordinary, and it was also done in India. Bhakti Vinod Thakur, I think it was, who called it the Bhadra Loka, the intellectual people of that part of the world. So it also happens a lot, not only in academia, but in religious circles, as is indicated in the purports, that sometimes people invent or concoct some new religion. It's a very common thing. There was a person I heard about in India who was kind of masquerading as a sadhu, and he was kind of sitting before an audience and was entirely motionless. So after a few days, it became kind of controversial. And in fact, it was later happened that the police had to come and see whether he was actually faking, or was he alive, or was he dead, or what. And after a while, they kind of investigated and determined he was actually dead. So there are people that profess to be spiritual people, but they concoct new ideas, and they get a lot of following. And one of them was mentioned in one of Prabhupada's books. I can't remember his name, but anyway, he was masquerading as Vishnu or Krishna, and he had a lot of female followers, not on the side but directly, because he preyed upon the innocent people who thought he was something special, and he had a lot of yogic power. So the narration that Prabhupada writes is that Bhakti Vinod was summoned by that was a time when the British organization, British government, was in charge of India. They were the colonial. India were the colonials, and they summoned Bhakti Vinod Thakur to sort this fellow out and find out what he was really all about. Vishika Shena, I think, was his name. Anyway, you've probably heard the story that Bhakti Vinod's family contracted some very high fever because this man had yogic power, and he knew he was under some kind of investigation, and therefore he kind of, in his own way, cursed the Bhakti Vinod family. So his wife and relatives and all children had very high fevers, and Bhakti Vinod Thakur's wife said that they might even die, so they should lay off this guy and let him just go his way and do his thing. But Bhakti Vinod was determined to expose him. And then a court case ensued, and it was determined that his yogic power was emanated from his long hair. And even the British rulers in the courtroom thought that this was possible. They knew something about yoga. And one of the story goes that one of the Briton jumped on him while he was in the dock being investigated in court and cut his hair. And then a few days later, because his yogic power had been evaporated when the hair cutting took place in a kind of unplanned way, he died in prison. And so that was, the original sort of faker. There's a lot of them now all over the world. So one of them that was faking came to India, and he had I was at the temple, and he came to America. This was in about 1967. And I don't want to get into it, dealing with his name, but he had a dog. He had a poodle. And he and his group, there was about 4 of them, were all together. They were a band. They were one of the pseudo Vaishnava groups. And so I set aside the no animals allowed in the temple temporarily, because he looked like he was from Bengal, which he was, and they were wearing saffron and they had black hair, and then he finally gave us some tickets to their performance. And I sat in on, I went to one of his performances at the Fillmore Ballroom, and it was completely uninteresting. But they were sponsored. They had their airfares paid and their accommodation and all their food by a person who was a very well-known, I think he was Bob Dylan's manager. So what I'm getting at is that these people who concoct new religious philosophies are completely, and his name was his one part of his name was Fakir, Fakir, which I think we get our word faker from that word. Anyway, it's a pretty standard word, and Fakir is used by different religious organizations to talk about the infidels, or people that are not reliable and just concocting something. So this concept of plagiarism is very rampant, and it's kind of like, you might say, use a lot, and it's kind of like people look the other way when it happens. Like some of the great artists, I was told by a person who traveled the world a lot, in Italy, they learn how to paint by painting, simulating, and copying the great masters of the past, which is undoubtedly a form of plagiarism. But when it comes to the arts, people tend to look the other way, especially with painting. And at one point, George Harrison was accused of plagiarism, and he lost this case. And he was fined, I think, $500,000 or something like that, because the former manager of their group brought a case of plagiarism against him, and they had a big blackboard in the courtroom. I was heard. This is what he told me. George Harrison told me, and showed that it was actually the same melody of a song that had been popular 2 or 3, 30 or 40 years before. But it was based on his song was called "My Sweet Lord," and their song was called "He's So Fine." He is so fine. And anyway, that was. And he said, well, maybe, he told the court, maybe it was plagiarism, but I did it unconsciously. And I really liked the melody. And if I had to do it over again, if I had to start from scratch, I would do it, because it was totally unconscious. And originally, the jury fined him $10 million. And then the judge, out of his kindness and mercy, lowered it to half of $1 million. So it's a kind of a, plagiarism has become somewhat the word has become somewhat popular, and people have tried to withdraw degrees from university degrees. It didn't actually happen, but they threatened that way. There was also a case that's sort of plagiarism where I don't know if you know about Brooklyn. It's a suburb of Manhattan. It's one of the big main suburbs. And the temple was located in an area that was kind of full of crime. It was so ridden with crime. It was a kind of slum that I wouldn't, and most people would never go out after dark in that part of Brooklyn, because it was just riddled with criminals and drug addicts and people who would, kill you for 25 cents. I mean, it was literally that bad. So in recent times, the area has become built up or gentrified, and now there are high-rise apartments on both sides and behind and across the road. I've seen pictures of it. And there's a restaurant here called the Cardamom Pod. And the owner of the Cardamom Pod sold her restaurant and opened up another restaurant in Brooklyn on the ground floor. And in that part of the world, there's a very large sidewalk outside on the ground floor, larger than most big cities that I know of in Australia. And during the summertime, people are allowed to sit there and have their prasadam or outside. So this person has kind of taken the prasadam to another level. I mean, some of you have been to her former restaurant in the Cardamom Pod in Southport, but she abandoned that place to go to New York. And it's it's become a very popular. It's been open about 4 months. Now they call it the Kardama Cafe, named after Kardama. Named after him, who's passed away. Anyway, what happened? This is kind of the inside story. Is that a part of that temple in Brooklyn was named the Bharata Corporation. It was done to keep the devotees free of litigation. They were at that time there was a lot of lawsuits against the devotees. So this Bharata Corporation, there was a few devotees involved in it, and this happened recently over the last couple of years. Was sold to a developer, property manager. To build, and they were, with the money they got from him, they were to build a second temple in another borough of New York called Queens, just east of there, and it's a very popular area for residential Indian people. And so the idea was that there would be a lot of people in that area. But fortunately, then there was a big controversy that arose. And this was one of the original temples in New York City. First of all, there was 26 Second Avenue. And then there was the building that Prabhupada called the skyscraper. And that was sold. That became a bit of a controversy too. On the plea that the electric bill for the elevators, it was a very tall building, about 6 or 7 or 8 or 9, maybe 50 stories tall. And Prabhupada actually had some darshans on the roof of that building. But anyway, it was sold, and part of the sale money went to this Brooklyn temple and to a temple in New Jersey, the adjacent state to New York State. And there was another one on the street Broadway. And I don't know if that Broadway one still exists, but the Brooklyn Temple it's probably one of the largest temple rooms in the movement. It's about 10 times the size of this temple. I've been there, so I know how big it is. And it's very solidly built. And Jayadwaita Maharaj, who's the main person in that area, that they have what they call air rights. It's a legal term. Air rights means that they can build up into the air. They can go as they wish, up to 60 stories, I think. But they're planning to add at least 40 stories to not a total of, to make it 40-story building. And because it's a very old and very solidly built building, it can withstand the weight of all those extra floors. So anyway, the building was actually sold, and it was sold, and there was a written contract, and they were going to open a new temple in the Queens borough, and then there was a big hearing at the one of the libraries in Brooklyn, and the GBC members were called in, and there were several lawyers involved, and one of the devotee lawyers talked to the Attorney General of Brooklyn and found out that this was actually illegal. Because there's a lot of legal reasons why it was illegal, but the temple money had to be given back to the developer, and the construction of the temple in Queens did not go ahead. And subsequently, it's a very, very built-up area now. It used to be a kind of a slum, but I've seen pictures of the restaurant, the building, and across the road, and on both sides of it, and it is a very sophisticated building. And a man came all the way from India to be the new president. The old president became persona non grata, and he's appealed the case twice and lost both times. So it doesn't look very happy for him. And this corporation is probably still existing, but it's not going to be very successful. So that's the story of the Brooklyn Temple. And if you ever have occasion to go to New York City and see Second Avenue, by all means go to the Brooklyn Temple, because that's the biggest temple, the biggest building, and it'll probably end up being the most popular building. And recently, I think I mentioned this in a class before, the former governor of New York State, his name is Cuomo, visited the temple, and he's now running for the mayor of New York City. And I don't know if he's going to win. He probably won't win, but for various scandalous reasons, he had to resign. But he spent several hours at the temple, spoke, and talked with the new president. They were both from New York City, and they kind of reminisced about the good old days. So that happened, and that office of being the governor of New York or the mayor of New York City is almost like being the president of the United States. For most people who are somewhat educated and lettered and have university degrees know that is a really important state. It was probably one of the most. It's still probably the cultural center and the financial center, in a way, of the United States. So that happened, and that even though the Attorney General kind of invalidated the contract, it was a form, because it was a form of plagiarism that it was sold. It's over and done with now, and it's a very huge and successful temple. If you ever happen to go to New York. So, are there any questions or comments? We'll probably have to stop here. Yes.
Attracted to things Eastern, especially Indian sort of stuff, so I'd started to go to this big yoga school down in Melbourne that was like the oldest yoga school down there. I didn't know anything.
Near in Melbourne itself or near Melbourne?
Near the city centre.
Oh.
Anyway, so I'd started doing these yoga classes, and then then I stayed at the temple, and so I buzzed up. And then this yoga teacher saw me with a shaved head and said, "No, you can't study here anymore because you've accepted a different teacher." I had a seeker. I didn't accept him as a teacher in the beginning, so I was just doing it. Anyway, then I found out that his foremost student owned a frozen chicken factory. So they obviously had
Indian person?
The guy, the yoga teacher's sort of leading student, his favourite student, was some guy that owned a frozen chicken factory. I was thinking at the time, it didn't sound right, but they all thought that was fine.
There's a group of people that are against too many. It's kind of like a racial thing. There's Indian people. They call it the Indianization of ISKCON. In some temples, not all of them, but in many of them, there's a kind of you might call it a racial conflict. You know, the brown people against the white people sort of thing. And what you're saying is that if some of them are not vegetarians, that's a no-no. And from what I know, the people of course, there's a very large Indian, they call it the diaspora, a very large Indian population in some of the major cities of the world. And because they're usually very well educated and very wealthy and very influential and very intelligent, sometimes it's happened that they've tried to take over. It's never actually happened, but it almost did a few times. So that's, some, as you mentioned, some are not vegetarians.
This centre certainly wasn't anything to do with ISKCON, this yoga centre.
Well, sometimes they do have things to do with ISKCON, but anyway, that's life.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, this story you told about the Bengali saffron garb person with a poodle, is this the same one that sort of faked ecstatic symptoms and then you went and reported to Prabhupada?
Yeah.
And Prabhupada made an interesting comment.
Yeah, he was, we used to call him a faker because that was sort of his name. And that happened. He pretended he was in a trance or something like that. And then when we told Prabhupada about it, he said you should have kicked him in the face. Is there anything else? Yes?
Thank you for the class, Maharaj. On the topic of plagiarism, in relation to that, I've heard one senior devotee say that if we don't give credit where credit is due...
If you don't, what? Give credit?
If we don't give credit where credit is due and we take credit for it, we'll be blamed for something we didn't do. Is there some Shastric reference for that?
Well, it's kind of a two-edged sword because plagiarism is when you pretend you're saying something that actually belongs to someone else. And Prabhupada was very conscious that did exist, so he always cited references in everything I think there are a few instances where he didn't. But in most things that I've read, he tells the canto, the Bhagavad Gita, or whatever it is. He tells the shloka, the name of the number, and it's all very up and up. But sometimes, in like I was saying, in the arts, and that's just one example of people in Italy that practice to paint like the great masters used to paint. That's part of the learning process, and they may be guilty of some form of plagiarism, but the plagiarism is when you don't give a reference to where it originally came from. You kind of masquerade that it's your own idea, and that's where the phrase plagiarism comes in, and that's stealing, in a sense. So that's considered illegal. But sometimes it's just not considered very important. I don't know if that's what you were asking. Is that a reasonable reflection on what you were getting to? I mean, in a sense, we're all plagiarists because we're just repeating what was already written in the Bhagavad Gita. And I think austerity is one of the things that's mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita. Austerity of speech is anudvegam karam bhakyam taya pakrita chetasam, that we should always speak from Vedic literature, what has already been written. And we should do it in a kind of pleasing way. And sometimes people, I mean, Prabhupada even got angry once that one of the men who had a kind of menagerie in his home was a rabid impersonalist, and he got so angry that the Prabhupada's servant left the room. He just couldn't be in the room where Prabhupada was angry. But in most cases, he was very mellow and very friendly, even when people were, opposed to Krishna consciousness, as long as they were not violently, masquerading as devotees, because there was a whole movement against the movement. But he didn't really, he was kind of saying that was sort of natural, and he didn't exhibit that. But when people from his part of the world, were propagating their way, sometimes he became almost violently angry. So it's a kind of a two-edged sword. One should always be very friendly, according to the Bhagavad Gita, and speak in a pleasing way, even if it's, someone who's an enemy. But it's not always possible. Or, it's not always recommended. Those are just some personal thoughts. Anything else? Okay, we'll stop at that point.